This is the Tom Bigby Tales. I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi on the Tom Bigby River called Columbus, Mississippi. And sometimes I write about the rest of the state. This episode is titled C.M. Lollar Murder or Self-Defense. This murder is brought to you by my fellow public historian, Cy Brown, who often gives me leads on interesting cases to explore. C.M. Lollar, or Charles Melvin, Mel Lollar to his friends, was a landowner in North Lowndes County near Caledonia. He owned a sizable plantation, which he farmed with a variety of sharecroppers and tenant farmers in 1916. Typically, tenants and sharecroppers settled up with the landowners just before Christmas after the cotton was all harvested, ginned, and sold. Tenants pay their rent from their proceeds, and sharecroppers settled their books and usually stayed indebted to the landowner. Plantation owners usually preferred sharecroppers to tenant farmers, and as sharecropping became more profitable, tenant farmers were often muscled off the farms. This is because tenant farmers owned their own animals, their own equipment, and their supplies. They too were at the mercy of the crop. However, they had the freedom to move more readily and worked on their own terms, something plantation owners often resented because they had little control over the tenant labor force. It was almost impossible to hold tenant farmers in place like it was to hold sharecroppers who were kept in place by their debt. Not only that, but farm owners could charge interest and penalties on that debt. Therefore, sharecropping was more lucrative for plantation owners. This brings us to February 9th, when Mel Lollar confronted his tenant farmer, John Odum, over rent from the previous year. With Lollar was his son, Charles Melvin Lollar Jr., and allegedly an African American man who also worked for Mel Sr. as a sharecropper. Lollar and Odum argued loudly for quite some time before Odum retired inside the cabin where he lived. Lollar left but returned about 3 p.m. Odum came around the side of his cabin and Lollar began arguing again. And this time, Lollar pulled a gun, according to both Odum and his wife, Ollie, and his children. Odum was shot in the leg. He then retrieved his gun from the porch and shot Lollar 8 times in the abdomen. Lollar was rushed to Columbus Hospital and taken into surgery with 2 surgeons attending, but his prognosis was grim. He died February 10th from his wounds. Odum gave himself up to authorities the same day as the shootings. He was held in the Caledonia jail, the county jail, on a $5,000 bond that his family, of course, could not raise. Lollar, in the meantime, was buried in Egger Cemetery in Caledonia, Mississippi. He was 46 years old and left behind a wife and 10 children. The eldest child was 23 and the youngest was 6 years of age. Odum sat in the county jail until his hearing. He engaged a very young E.M. Holmes as his defense attorney. On February 16th, 1916, a preliminary trial was held in Caledonia. Charles Jr. and one of his father's sharecroppers were there to testify. Both men testified that Odum fired first after Lollar told Odum he was kicking him off the property. However, on cross-examination, the sharecropper man grew confused and contradicted himself frequently. Odum then testified self-defense, and his wife corroborated his testimony. The case was then bound over to a grand jury. The grand jury convened on April 27th of 1916, where the jury failed to return an indictment as they determined that Odum shot Lollar in self-defense. Odum was immediately released from jail. John Odum, his wife, and 3 kids, now kicked off the plantation where he had shot and killed Mel Lollar, the owner, were forced to move. They moved to Jones County, Mississippi, where they are found on the 1920 census. John Odum died in 1934 and is buried in the Shelton Cemetery in Jones County, Mississippi, next to his wife, Ollie Mae. I want to thank you for coming on my Tom Bigby Tales podcast and following along as we go up and down the river and finding the stories about the people and their lives and the crazy politics that happen in this town. Until next time.